Hello everyone, and today we are back with the object building tutorial. This is gonna be part number 4, and as promised yesterday or in the previous episode whenever you watched it, we're going to be taking a look at textures. So firstly, what is it, a texture? Since I'm not being any PC magician or anything, I'm just going to say that a texture in our case is a picture that we're going to use on our object. It's a graphic file of the PC, and openBVE is able to work with PNG file, portable network graphics. That is the format that I would personally suggest for using, but also if you want, you can use JPG, you can use GIF, and you can also use the good old BMP or the bitmap. However, the bitmap is, if you want to keep it 24-bit, it's huge, and I've tried that, and if you try to convert it into 8-bit bitmap, the BMP file, the color palette that is going to be used, it's always something questionable, and it simply messes the texture up, and it degrades the quality of the picture itself. So let's talk about a few basic facts about textures today. Not sure if we're gonna get to applying the texture to a face of our cube, but maybe later. As you can see, I have pre-created a file named texture. Very original, right? And I'm going to open that thing up in Adobe Photoshop right now. This is a PNG file, and that PNG file it's just a plain white rectangle with texture written on it. It's not genius, as you might say, but later on it will actually prove quite handy, because we'll be showing how to put the texture on a face of the object correctly, and the direction of the text will actually tell us if we're doing okay. So, a first basic fact about textures: openBVE requires the textures to be to have specific dimensions. The best dimensions that you can use are 2 to the power of basically anything. So 2 to the power of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's analogic to size of computer RAM, so in megabytes I mean. So you can use 16 pixels at 16 pixels high and 16 pixels wide texture. You can use 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, and so on. As you can see, I have used 512 at 512 height and width. There is no specific rule defined on how large your texture should be on an object. I was trying to use the texture corresponding with the dimension of the object. Usually I was going at 100 pixels per 1 meter of object size, but that's not necessarily correct, because often when you run the sim and you render the object and you display it, it's often far away from the root itself or from the rails themselves, and you do not really see it in big detail. I mean, you can probably see like small squares somewhere in the distance and stuff. So it's not necessary to have huge textures with high detail for all of your objects. That is something you need to realize and keep in mind, because if you put too many big textures into your root, it's going to become unplayable and or difficult to play for only high-end PCs. Now, why is it important to keep the texture sizes like this, to mean 2 to the power of something? This is because if you don't do it, if you put like random dimensions, let's say 400 width and 300 height, the openBVE render is going to recalculate the texture anyway. It's going to stretch it to the I think it is to the nearest bigger size of, or nearest bigger power of 2. So that means 400 at 300 would go to 512 at 512 anyway. This, however, is unnecessary load for the GPU, because the GPU obviously has to recalculate the size of the texture, and that's something we don't want it to be doing, because we need it to render our objects. We need it we need our routes to be playable and to have reasonable FPS, and this is obviously not reached by having the render recalculate all the textures that we are using. So just keep in mind that we need to use reasonable values for texture sizes, and we also need them to be the power of 2. Any power of 2 will do. I mean, you're not going to create a texture 2 pixels at 2 pixels, because that doesn't make any sense, right? But anything bigger than that, let's say from 16 to 16 and stuff like that, it is usable. So the texture that I've got here, I've opened with Adobe Photoshop. I'm going to show you a quick demonstration on how to work with it. It only has 4 kilobytes because it's simply a white rectangle with plain text in it, so it's not gonna be big. But a normal texture with some picture in it, or wood, I don't know, steel, whatever, is gonna be much bigger. It's gonna have a few hundreds of kilobytes. So if you by any chance have Adobe Photoshop at your disposal, you can always reduce the texture size by selecting this option here, which is Save for Web and Devices. You can see the color table here. This is the difference between bitmap and a PNG. The PNG actually has an adaptive color table, so it actually uses the colors that are used in the picture, while the BMP usually forces its own color table to the BMP, and that's why it messes up. So I strongly suggest using PNGs. As you can see, even though it is 4 kilobytes now, after the reduction it's gonna have 1.682 kilobytes, so it's gonna be smaller. So let's save it. I'm going to save it to the test object, because that's where it's located right now. So I'm going to save. It's prompting me if I want to overwrite it, which I will do. And I can close Adobe Photoshop. This tool is very useful for various works with the textures, but you have to have access to it. From free tools, I would probably recommend using GIMP, or for texture conversions I would probably use XNView, but everyone has his thing. So the program that I might like to work with textures might not be good enough for you, because you cannot get used to it, and you cannot get grip of the controls and stuff. So probably the best way for everyone is to use his favorite picture editing software, because most of the functions are similar. So we've got that sorted. I'm going to close Photoshop now. No, I don't want, because I already saved it. And as you can see, it had 4 kilobytes. Now it has 2, because it's only 8-bit now. If I put properties, you can see the bit depth. This is the bit depth in check. It says 8, so that's 8 bits. Right, so now that we've got our texture and we want to apply it to the face of the cube, what do we need to do? Obviously we haven't done it yet, because we're only creating faces filled with one tone of color. So that one we're going to disregard now, because we don't need that black color in there anyway, or anymore. And we need to call the texture. We need to tell the program that the texture is situated in the same folder, and we actually want the texture to load here onto this face. So we're going to delete the set color, because the set color would be overriding the texture, and we are going to use the command load texture. Okay, I've got caps lock on, of course. Load texture. This command basically tells the program to look in the folder where the object itself is. So that means this object, the black square. It will be looking in the same folder always. If you don't want it to look in the same folder, you can do that as well. But for now, let's stick with the same folder. We need to put a comma, and then we need to put the actual file name. Now, I'm not sure about Linux, but in Windows you do not need to watch for case sensitivity. So you can put capital T, you can put normal T, it will work anyway. So now that we've got the load texture command in there, the render knows it needs to load this texture, but it doesn't know what to do with it. So we are still working with this face, remember. So this face has center vertices, right? They have indexes 0, 1, 2, 3. That's what we've learned previously. Now, to tell the render how to apply a texture to that face, we need to use this command, set texture coordinates. Now this might get a bit confusing, because as you know, the vertices have their own coordinates, which are here, and also the textures have their own coordinates. So how are they defined? Let me show you. I'm going to open this thing here. I'm going to make the window smaller, and we'll go from there. So the texture itself has its own coordinates. The set texture coordinates command uses it has 3 parameters. The first parameter is the index of the vertex that we're using the set texture coordinates for. So we're going to be using the 0 first. That means this is going to be 0. This is the index of the vertex that we're talking about. Now, the other 2 are the actual coordinates. The texture has 2 coordinates: the width and the height, or depth if you want. Now, whenever both width and height are 0, that is the left top corner of the texture. This corner right here is coordinate 1 in width and 0 in height. This coordinate right here is coordinate 1 in width and 1 in height. And this coordinate right here, this corner, is 0 in width and 1 in height. So we are talking about the left bottom corner of the cube now, correct? If we want our texture to be displayed correctly here, we need this bottom corner to show up here in the bottom corner. So that means in vertex 0, which we have entered as the first one, we need to put 0 for width of the texture, because we're still here, but we need to put 1 for height, because we are not in the left top corner, we are in the bottom left corner. So that means 1 in height. Moving on, we are now talking about vertex number 1. We are basically just following the clockwise order of the vertices here. That means in vertex number 1, which is this one, the left top corner, correct? We need to put this left top corner of the texture, which has 0 in width and also 0 in height. Moving on to the third vertex, which actually has index of 2, unfortunately, because that is simply how it works in the sim. Yeah, I forgot the S at the end. So we're putting 2, and this is the top right corner of the front face of the cube. It also needs the top right corner of the texture. And as you can see, this is 1 in width but 0 in height. Sorry. Might be a bit confusing, unfortunately, because for some strange reason the simulator doesn't work the same for the vertices and for the textures, because if it would be the same as in vertices, it would be 0, 0 here, right? But it's just created the opposite way for some reason. So this is actually for coordinates of the texture. This thing is 0, 0, 0 width, 0 height. Now we've set up the third vertex of the cube, which is this one, or this one if you wish. And for it we have applied this corner of the texture. That means 1 in... Sorry, we're talking about this one now. I'm sorry about that. We're talking about this one. So we have applied for this corner of the cube, we have put this corner of the texture. That means 1 in width and 0 in height. moving on to the last vertex of the cube, which is the one that I was talking about before. Unfortunately, it's the bottom right corner of the front face and the bottom right corner of the texture as well. And this is vertex with index number 3, and it is 1 in width and 1 in height. So it's like this. If you're creating your vertex orders and add faces always in the same way, it will form this pattern, and you can just copy it over later on. I'll show you that in the next video, because this one would be so long, it will be too long. So I'm going to save it and hope that I haven't failed somewhere. No, I haven't. So as you can see, the texture is applied correctly to the face. So remember, this corner of the texture is 0 in height and 0 in width. This one is 0 in height but 1 in width. This one is 1 and 1, and this one is 1 in height and 0 in width. What we need to realize that we can also use decimal numbers here, of course, same as here. Basically, you can use decimal numbers here, you can use decimal number here. In that case, of course, the texture won't be displayed as a whole. I can put 0.5 in here. That means basically, if you put 0.5 in height, but you keep the in width, this is the width, right? The first one is the width, and the second one is the height. So if you put 0.5 in the width, basically only this half, the right half of the texture, will be displayed. I can show you, and as you can see, it has been cut and only this part is shown. Similarly to that, you can put 0 here, and you can put, for example, 3 in width. That means the texture will be shown 3 times. So the first time, second time, and third time. See, here it goes. You can of course do the same for the height. It will look like this. But for now, let's just stick to ones, because that's the most simple thing that we can do at the moment. So I hope it makes it a little bit clear on how to apply a texture to the face. This is the simplest case that you can encounter. It's just applying one texture to one face, nothing too complicated. You can of course do some texture rotations. You can crop the texture. You can avoid some parts that you don't want. You can basically do many things with textures, let's say. But for now, as a simple introduction to this topic, I would end it here. And in the next section, next session, we'll talk about some more things, how to apply complicated textures, how to use the transparent color and stuff like that. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.